As impact investing gains momentum worldwide, Intellidex has launched the inaugural Africa Impact Investment Awards. The awards are being introduced to recognize organizations across Africa that are doing valuable work at the intersection of finance and social development. The project is conducted in partnership with the African Venture Philanthropy Alliance, Impact Investing Ghana, Impact Investing South Africa and the National Advisory Boards of Impact Investing for both Nigeria and Zambia. For more on this, we're joined by Dr. Grant Kruger, the Managing Director of Intellidex. Dr. Kruger, good morning, because you're speaking to us from Boston in the USA. Impacting investing is the descriptor at the core of the awards. What is it?
Good morning from my side, and good afternoon to you and all of your viewers. So Hugo, the Impact Investing Awards really stems out of a lot of our work. As a company, Intellidex works very broadly in capital markets and financial services, mainly in South Africa, but more and more across the African continent. And the Impact Investing Awards really brings together two of our very big areas of focus of the work that we do, which is both working at the finance level and then at the social development level. And impact investing is a new frontier of how we're thinking about bringing about fundamental changes to our societies, meeting huge needs, whether it is social or environmental needs on the continent. And the impact investing fraternity has been working really hard already to finding innovative ways of solving for those problems. And we thought it was time to recognize all of that work and celebrate early successes, but also use this as an opportunity to point the direction for the future. We do that in many other sectors already. We do it in private banking, we do that in wealth management, we do it in stockbroking, we do some very sophisticated stuff with the JSE, with the South African Venture Capital and Private Equity Association. So we've seen that awards are a really great way to focus attention, show great examples, and really excite people about possibilities. And that's why we thought it's time to launch an Africa-wide Impact Investment Awards process.
Now, Dr. Kruger, when I was reading up on you, you said in a statement, we're introducing the awards to recognize organizations across Africa that are doing valuable work at the intersection of finance and social development. Now, what are the parameters by which you determine what is valuable?
Yeah. So what we draw on when we look into impact investments is we draw in two really important areas that have up to now been quite disparate. So the notion of investments also really quite invokes the idea of financial returns and risk management. So those two disciplines, financial returns, risk management, come from the finance perspective. And now what's really exciting, Hugo, is we're bringing in a new dimension into thinking about what success means, which is the impact factor. So you'll start to hear more and more this notion of risk, return, and impact. So that sort of dynamic relationship between those three things is what we're really seeing in impact investments. And that's the exciting part, is it's no longer simply about having only financial returns and managing risk. And the other side of the development side, we're no longer only thinking about spending money on social programs that have no embedded monitoring, evaluation, and impact measurement, as well as fundamentally this notion of sustainability. The reason that people like myself, who have always been interested in social development but working in corporations and traditional finance, the reason we now really find this process this moment so interesting and exciting, and we think we need to grab onto this, is because we finally have something that tells us it's possible to achieve really fundamental social outcomes, really fundamental good environmental outcomes, and we don't have to do that in the absence of financial returns and mitigating for risks of capital. So we find as an organization, this new frontier of impact investments that bring all of those together is a really interesting way for us to solve problems on the continent.
Now, you've pillared the awards around Ghana, South Africa, Nigeria, and Zambia. Are these the only four countries that are doing significant philanthropic work?
You mean impact investment work?
Correct.
No. The short answer to that is no, and I'm super excited about that. So the reason that we have partnered with those four for the time being is because in the global spectrum, or even more closely in the African context, those are the four countries that have made the most progress so far on building up more robust impact investment ecosystems in their countries. So if I can just share with you just a little bit of background on that, Hugo. There is an organization that is globally located in London called the GSG, the Global Steering Group for Impact Investments. Through the work of that organization, we're seeing that they're establishing impact investment ecosystems in various countries around the world, including Africa. These are the four, the ones that you've listed, South Africa, Zambia, Ghana, and Nigeria, are the four that already have an established network. So it makes sense that if you're going to be doing something like this, which requires quite a lot of organizing in country, that we leverage the good work that those countries have already done. But the other good news is other African countries are quite close to also starting to launch their own internal ecosystems. So the awards are not only restricted to those countries. It's just that those four countries have really made a lot of advances in setting up their ecosystems. But certainly what we're doing is using those four networks in country, as well as working with the GSG and other countries, Egypt, Senegal, Kenya. Those countries already are making quite advanced steps in getting their own ecosystem set up. So no, this is not restricted to those four countries. And we are pulling together, nominations from the entire continent. And also we're inviting judges from the entire continent. So we really want it to be as representative of Africa and showcase all of the wonderful innovations that are already happening across the continent. So it is Africa-wide.
Well, let's talk about poverty and hunger, job creation, social conditions and inequality are the key areas potentially transformed by impact investment. Now, unpack for us how.
Unpack how? So the answer is absolutely yes. The wonderful thing, Hugo, is we're already at the stage at which we can start to talk about some examples. And that's really why we think the time is right to start with launching an awards. In the South African context, we've seen that perhaps you've heard of these structures called social impact bonds. So those would be, for example, we had bonds for jobs in South Africa. There was also the early childhood development bond that was already tested in the country. So both of those serve as excellent examples where we've had these innovative structures being tested. And the bond for jobs was specifically about creating job opportunities for young people in the South African context. And the early childhood development social impact bond was all about creating an enabling environment for early childhood education in the Western Cape area. The results from both of those, I would call them sort of prototype versions of this, have been absolutely spectacularly wonderful. And so we think there's tremendous opportunities for doing more of those kinds of structures that actually bring these solutions to scale. And that's the wonderful thing about impact investments is because there's a built-in mechanism for making sure that you're reaching financial returns, but most importantly, we really take a very close look at monitoring and measuring the social outcomes. Are we attaining the goals of actually getting young people into jobs? Are we attaining the goals of actually getting early childhood development, the reading, let's say, for example, one measure, the ability of children to be able to read at a certain level at a certain age. So we put those very specific kind of measures into these programs. And so the actual financial return for the investor is only triggered when those results are attained. So it's in everybody's interests to make sure that the social outcomes are actually reached. And then we see a wonderful little ecosystem that is built around attaining those outcomes. And that's how this whole mechanism works.
So I'm not sure if my next question is answered by what you've just given, but I'll ask it nonetheless. Now, outside of a corporate conscience, if you will, why else would an organization founded on capitalist ideologies be interested in impact investing? We all know too well that philanthropy is, by and large, a personal decision.
True story. So the wonderful thing, Hugo, again, is this idea that actually, let me come at this from a different angle, which is this. We know that there already is a lot of money going into development in Africa. The estimate is about 160 billion every year. But we also know there's a major shortfall, that the 160 billion that is spent on development actually doesn't meet the expectation that the UN has set for the Sustainable Development Goals. And that gap between 150 billion that is already being funded and the 2.5 trillion that is needed we really have to start looking at alternative places for where that funding can come from. And so the place that we're looking is in the private markets, where there's a good estimate is about $200 trillion worth of funding available. So why would financial investors that are really interested in financial returns be interested in this? Is because they can actually do both. They can actually achieve a good social outcome, which we're finding that desire for a good social outcome is no longer restricted only into the conversations in corporations that work in CSI, that kind of, only that small part of that business. More and more, and especially in the African context, the private sector recognizes that they actually play a very, very important role in their core business of uplifting societies and communities. And it's no longer only about the bleeding heart social dimension to these businesses where it's almost hived off into a very small part of that business. More and more boardrooms and executives are thinking about the social role of their businesses. So that conversation is no longer separate. That conversation is actually strategically intertwined. So what we're seeing as impact investments is actually now the manifestation of that big realization that these things are intertwined. And so companies and the private sector is more and more looking for ways in which they can still be sustainable from a financial point of view, but very consciously able to generate social returns. And so you're asking why specifically would people who are interested in financial returns want to do this? Well, we are starting to see more and more that there is a very solid business case for doing the right thing, i.e., having good social or environmental outcomes. And that doesn't mean that it only is done in your CSI, but it actually can really be fundamental and core to your core business. So we're seeing the evidence, and impact investment has been wonderful for us to generate that kind of evidence that it is possible to generate those good returns and make a financial return. So you don't have to have those conversations separately anymore. This is the exciting part, Hugo.
All right, so we've had a look at why the awards have come about. Now, what are the award categories for the inaugural awards? How does one enter? Individuals? Is it about individuals? Is it registered organizations that it's limited to?
So we're looking at, so all of those questions, the answer is yes to all of them. We're recognizing a number of categories across the ecosystem. So the thing that I guess the sort of subtext of why we have so many categories, and I can name some of them for you very quickly.
Please.
So for example, we want to recognize, now, this is going to sound really biased, but my personal favorite award, and I shouldn't have a favorite, but it is the recognition of the most innovative financial instrument of the year, right? So we're looking at those innovative financial brains that are coming up with these new structures, like these social impact bonds, or the idea of funds, that pool different funding expectations together, or different pools of capital, sources of capital together into these new innovative structures. So that's one example. But let me step away from where my area of passion is and tell you about some of the others. We also want to recognize the great work, and I can't say this enough, this rests on the great work of the social entrepreneurs and what we also sometimes call implementing partners that already are active on the continent. So there'll be a special award to recognize those social enterprises that are doing phenomenal work already. We're also looking at the funders, so the asset owners of the year, the impact fund of the year. We want to recognize the very critical role that traditional philanthropy and the donors play in this space as well. So if I can just mention to you why we think that is such an important award as well, is we want to recognize the fact that we're now rethinking what we do with philanthropic capital, right, or philanthropic funding. And we're casting philanthropic funding now in the impact investment space really as catalytic capital. So we're really thinking about that as maybe seed funding or angel funding, if you like, from the traditional investment language. But we're thinking about philanthropists playing a critical way to unlock these mechanisms. So we want to recognize their great work. We have an award called the Impact Market Builder of the Year. So we also want to recognize with that award the critical role that governments play in these structures. You can hear that when we're talking about these innovative financing structures, sometimes we need governments to come to the party because sometimes we have to really rethink the tax or the registration mechanisms in the country. So take, for example, in the South African context where you have your public benefit organizations that are not supposed to make private investments and earn a return. so that it really throws up many questions about our current regimes of registration and structure and regulation and oversight. So we need to work with governments to figure out the dispensation for some of these structures to work. Some governments already are making really good progress on that. The South African government is one of them. And we really want to recognize the wonderful contributions that governments themselves are doing as well. There will also obviously be a need to recognize perhaps individual contributions. So in as much as we recognize that many of these structures require a village, if you like. It takes a village to raise a child. But even with these impact investment structures, it takes a village of people to do this. But sometimes you want to recognize make a special contribution or a special award for someone who's made a big difference. So there'll be an individual award. Hugo, in total, there will be about 10 awards that we will be making. And the best place to go to do those nominations would be on our website. So that would be intellidex.co.za. And we've got a special place, a page on our website where folks can go, take a look at the awards, take a look at the backgrounds, but there's a nomination form right there as well.
So when we talk about impact funding, or certainly activities that impact communities in any number of areas, for a corporate or a large business or large organization, for them the accolade of having been recognized is sufficient. But for an individual who's in a small village, who's made an impact on his community, but potentially that impact can be rolled out to several other communities, we'll be looking for a little more than just acknowledgement. Is there a plan for those individuals, those types of situations? So,
Hugo, I believe that comes as a consequence of what we're doing in the awards, right? So I'm hearing what you're saying, and it really does excite me. That's one of the biggest things that I really hope will come out of these awards. And certainly I'm not in the world where I think these things happen without a very clear intentionality behind it. So we really have to, I love your question, we really have to keep our eyes open for that. But now think about it. In this kind of Pan-African award, we're going to be able to recognize and pick up exactly those kinds of maybe phenomenal localized interventions that are working and are really showing that we're getting the social impact and getting the financial returns. Now that to me says that is an investment opportunity for bigger funding and more funders to get involved, to bring out those phenomenally small but very impactful outcomes and put more funding behind them and put almost jet fuel into their engines to make them grow and make them expand, take them to scale, and make an even bigger difference, because we have the evidence and we can be confident that if those projects that are delivering those outcomes get more funding, we can very likely take them to scale. And you can imagine that if we pick up something that is working in a village somewhere on the continent, now the eyes are on it to be able to really take it to scale. So that's one of the phenomenal outcomes. I'm so glad you picked up on that subtext in this whole program, is that's one of the exciting things that can happen. And like I said to you, that I'm not expecting that it's going to happen completely naturally. We're going to have to work deliberately and with great intention to identify those and then put them on a global stage so that they can get more recognition and more funding. That would be a tremendous outcome for me.
It certainly would. Dr. Grant Kruger, Managing Director of Intellidex, speaking to us about the inaugural Africa Impact Investment Awards. Appreciate your time.